rainwater harvesting design in Bill County nearly 10 years ago. Mr. Kane's presentation today will cover the history, application, and basic principles of rainwater harvesting. He will discuss the difference between active and passive rainwater collection strategies, as well as the difference between commercial and residential design. And he will briefly cover the basics of volume calculation, tank sizing, system placement, and more. Please welcome T. Barnes Kane.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. I can speak softer or louder. Thanks for the introduction, Chris. So I do have a presentation, but I'm going to probably start with some more basic stuff. So I'd like to do this in a workshop format. So any question that comes to mind to anybody at any point, feel free to raise your hand or interrupt, and then I will repeat the question so we get it get it recorded, and then I'll attempt to answer the question. So who currently is collecting rainwater? So, and is everybody else interested who did not raise their hand interested in collecting rainwater? Okay, so that's, and are there any people that don't believe in rainwater here? Okay, it's going to be an easy crowd. Because one of the first questions I get just talking to people on the street is, oh, it doesn't rain enough here to collect rainwater. That's not even true in Phoenix or places where they get half as much rainwater as we do. And I said, so if you live in a place where you need to collect rainwater, why would you have that attitude? I don't understand. But it's always going to rain. It may be more sporadic. And I think that anyone that's lived here, and I've lived here for about 20 years, and I'm currently splitting my time between here and Colorado, where my electric is on, in the Central Rockies. Still very dry, still very, get more moisture in the form of snow in the high Rockies, but it's still very dry. So it's still southwestern climate. One of the things I'm going to start with is the standard is a supply and demand discussion. And so to help with anybody that hasn't done this before. So it really is so it's really kind of that simple when it comes to doing a rainwater harvesting budget. So you'll have a, if somebody actually wants to run a calculator for me that also wants to give me I need a square footage of a roof of a capture area, a real number so somebody can get something real out of this. Who wants to run a calculator for me?
How about our treasurer sitting right in front of you? You can't do square root, you try to.
So give me a square footage number of a typical house or even your house. 2,000 square feet? Oh, that's going to be easy. Okay. So you take the square footage and you multiply that times 0.623. This is a factor for how many gallons of water you can capture off of 2,000 square feet in a 1-inch storm. So if we multiply that, 1,246? Okay. So, and this is a perfect calculation. So you can also think of this as 263 gallons for every 1,000 square feet of roof. However, it's not perfect. And if you have to apply a runoff coefficient. If you have a metal roof, if you have a shingle roof, if you're collecting off of a driveway or a patio, those will, oh, look at that. Technology. Okay. This is great. So actually, anyone that doesn't have this book, which the city gives away, this is the Rainwater Harvest, they're available up here. Has everybody seen this or have one? This is great because this has runoff coefficients in it. It even has sample cities around the state of what annual rainfall is. So let's continue on with this supply. Okay, so we multiply 1,264 gallons times 0.90. Let's say that we lose 10% of that runoff to the shingles on the roof or bouncing off or some evaporation, just some inefficiency. So if we multiply that by 1121, okay. So that'd probably be about the best you could do. That's a pretty high yield. And some studies show that if we get like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, this calculation won't work. You'll hardly get anything with a fraction of an inch. But a full inch, you start to saturate the capture surface, and there you have it. So, how many times the years are going to rain? How many times are we going to get a 1-inch storm this year? 30? No, that would be awesome. That would be awesome. So
3.
yeah. So I don't know. Anyway, what did we get last year?
3.
Let's go read your slide.
Do they consider snow? Yes. Well, you can ask them about snow.
So you guys are debating how many inches we're going to get? Is it going to be 12, 10,
3.
10?
The video guy will edit this out.
Yeah.
Right?
Although it is fun to watch.
It's thinking. Let's see what happens. Okay, so let's make 12 just to make it a little more interesting. 12 inches annual rainfall.
That's all right.
13,457. 457. Okay, so that's gallons, an annual capture from 2,000 square feet. So we don't need that much storage. Let's say that we're going to capture the whole thing, okay, because we're really into it. And so we'll take this number, and because we get half our rain in the wintertime and the other half during monsoon, and we don't need to store 13,000 gallons. We need to take 13K and divide it in half, approximately, which you can sort of start to see. Okay, so 6,000. I'll just call it 6,000. This would be the maximum tank size that you wanted. The maximum doesn't mean you can't do less, but the maximum tank size for this size roof in this climate with that kind of rainfall. So there are 3,000 gallon tanks available above ground poly. That's probably one of the most efficient sizes to purchase, as in terms of price per gallon. 2,500, 3,000 gallon above ground poly tanks. And below ground, just to carry that a little farther, I'm doing a below ground system and probably multiply the price of an above ground system times 3 or 4 for underground, because the tanks are more expensive because they have to be stronger. You need excavation cost. There's more plumbing involved, and there's more planning involved in getting everything to go in the ground. But so 6,000 our maximum. Then we get practical about tank size. And so let's just leave it at that for the moment. Let's say you can do 2,000 to 3,000 gallon tanks if you wanted to do that. So the other part is the demand side, which is really a really important question to ask, which is, what are you irrigating? What are you going to use the water for? It's the first question I'll ask anybody. Somebody says that they want to just irrigate or wash their car with it, or drink it. You can drink it. I've done a number of potable systems too. Not working. What do you know? I'm not talking. Okay, well, we do a restart sometime. Okay. It's also for things. It just became incredibly slow yesterday. It's about ready to cave in. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so So what do you, number one, most people are collecting water for irrigation. And while I'm on that topic, I want to make a definition about rainwater, and a lot of people mislabel it as reuse water, but it's not reuse water. It's an alternative water source that's currently underutilized in most situations. So it's I call it a new source or an alternative water source, but it's not a reuse. It's not like gray water is reuse, effluent is reuse. But rainwater is a new source of water. And you know, from the overall hydrological standpoint, when it does rain on the landscape, in general, about 90% is lost to evaporation. And then only that 10% actually gets into the waterways and soil absorption, so the plants can take it up. But, and it is another misnomer that we're diverting water away from the groundwater. So really, rainwater, only in certain places is it, certain places is it going to recharge an aquifer. Most people think, oh, you let it soak in. It soaks in, you know, 1 inch soaks in 4 inches, 1 inch rain. I mean, so you need a lot of water concentrated in a usually a very sandy, deep, gravelly riparian zone for any water to recharge the aquifer. Let's see, other misnomers. Well, that's it. Some others will come up. Okay, back to demand side. So if you have an existing irrigation system, you can put a pump on a tank, and you can connect it to irrigation and specifically irrigate with rainwater. It's the best. The best rain. No, nothing. No.
I think you have to do a full redo.
Yeah, it takes a while. This is the. We'll just see what happens. Oh, application. Oh, because it is open. We want to shut it down? Yeah, shut it completely down. Yeah. Let's do this. Oh, here we go. So reasons why people, maybe some of a reason why somebody might want to collect rainwater. What's anybody?
Vegetable garden.
Vegetable garden. Okay. What's that?
Fish pond.
Fish pond. That'd be good water for fish pond. High quality. Yeah, just to save from using city water, or so in general, which would help the situation. What other reasons? I have a couple. What about security? Like if the power goes out, you actually have some water stored on site, or if there is a forest fire, or infrastructure breaks down. A fire suppression. A lot of have done fire suppression systems where people will devote the bottom 4,000 gallons of a tank for fire suppression, and actually then their fire insurance will go down because they actually have a hydrant on their property. So there's lots of different reasons. It's ethics. It's a good thing to do. And you're also self-sufficient. That's another thing. Or there's no other water source. Rainwater is your only option. Like the folks up in that have those properties up near Ash Fork, the 40-acre chunks where they capture off their roof, and that's the only water they have unless they want to haul it in, which is, not just expensive but a hassle. And so there's a good, it's best practice. So done potable systems as well, which really amounts to just additional filtration, which amounts to just quick. Maybe I can write these down if anybody's interested. Who's interested in potable?
Well, I'm just curious, is there a way to you have to filter some of the water.
That's right. You don't filter it going in. So, and I'll put up another post and go through a basic system. So, actually, I think I'm going to do that right now. So here, love these giant post-its. I'm going to go through the basic system. So I'm going to go show a little cross section of the house. So V gutter. The first form of we talked about roof surfaces a little bit. Probably pre-finished metal being the highest quality roof. Asphalt shingle is okay. There's a lot of tests have been done on asphalt shingle, and because asphalt is not water soluble, you don't get a lot of asphalt. And you get the mineral coating from the roofing, but you don't get asphalt in the water. One of the worst roofs is galvanized corrugated metal, because your water will be extremely high in zinc. And so you want to avoid that. So the surface area, we already did that calculation. First, a gutter required or some concentration of water. The first option, there's options to actually do a gutter top where it's a mesh that goes on top of a gutter. You've probably seen there's numerous products available for that. You don't have to do that, but if you're in an area with heavy pine needles or heavy leaf deposit, that would do it. So then the first form of basic filtration, you did the downspout, and you cut that downspout, and then you mount the rain head. A lot of people call these diverters. The technical term is actually rain head, because it's not just a diverter. There's actually a couple of different types. I can pass these around if anyone wants to take a closer look. So this is where the gutter stops. A sloping screen, the majority of the big stuff, debris, leaves, what falls off the edge. And then there's an insect screen on the inside for the second defense. So that you can take a look at that. So this is the basic form of filtration. If nothing else, you should use a rain head. If this is the only form of filtration you use. And there's two different types. This one's a slightly sort of an advanced model that does the same thing, but I'll just pass that on. Just so you can do a little show and tell. So getting the leaves, separating the leaves out, getting as much water as possible. Bees need regular maintenance, probably twice a year. I just went back to visit a customer yesterday, and the thing was completely gunked up. So she wasn't collecting any rain. So it's important to do it, sometimes depending on the topography, you may need a step ladder to get up, take the screens out, knock them out, put them back in, at least twice a year. So then at this point we have an option. If we want higher quality water, we can add what's called a first flush device. And that is basically a vertical pipe with a screw fitting on the bottom. It's like a 4-inch pipe, 4 to 6 feet long, that fills with water, so the finer sediments that came through the screen of these rain heads will settle in here, and then this fills up during a storm. This fills up fairly quickly, and then it overflows into a tank. Anybody see this okay? I know I wish I was a little closer, a little bigger, but okay. So that's an inlet. So these are usually 3 or 4-inch diameter. PVC is the most common material, and so the tank. A little landscaping in here. Maybe a few birds. Some nice. The horizon. So this is and then the inlet, you can just stop it here, but best practice is to take it to the bottom of the tank and do what's called an energy reducer, where you do 2 90s and an upturn so the water gushes out. It doesn't come in and pound onto the bottom of the tank. Because the pounding on the bottom of the tank will churn up all the sediment from the previous storm. So this best practice is to continue that pipe into the floor and do 2 upturns. There's other products available that can do that instead, but you might as well just make it out of fittings. There is, I belong to an organization called ARCSA, which is American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. Go to the annual meeting every year, and there's hundreds and thousands of products available from the most basic. Yes?
How often do you have to clean that long?
Good question. So yes. How often do you have to clean out the first flush device, if you have one at all? Well, the customer I just told you about yesterday, they hadn't cleaned it out in 2 years, and there was a foot of stinky sludge in the bottom of that thing. It was leaking out, which is okay. It's good. It's important for it to have a slow leak. In fact, you put an emitter on the end of the fitting here, and take that little quarter inch pipe over to some landscape, so it drains out, and so it doesn't freeze. I've actually taken more first flush devices out than I've put in, because in our climate, they get under maintained, and then there's water in this thing, and then December and January come around and the thing freezes and bursts in the whole system, and then people will complain, I hate rainwater harvesting. This is stupid. So it's really about maintenance. So I've taken more of these out because if we're just collecting water for irrigation, and we do a calming inlet, let a little bit of sediment builds up on the bottom, and it's fine. I've had 2 2,500-gallon tanks in for almost 10 years, and I still only have about probably half an inch of very fine sediment that is built up in the tank. So the other thing about tanks that is important to know is that, and this is true, all these concepts that I'm talking about work for every single system size. So these are just best practice for every rainwater system, whether it's 100 gallons or whether it's 5,000 gallons. So this water, it fills, and then you'll use it, and it will drain, and that water cycles. And a particular type of bacteria forms on the inside of tanks because of the moisture, and they're beneficial bacteria. It's called the biofilm. And they actually, if there's any nutrients that come off the roof, bird poop, dust, organic material from trees, vegetation, any kind of nitrogen load in here will be taken care of by the biofilm. It will actually consume that. So if you get a load of nutrients in the form of nitrogen or some organics in here, if you get a little bit of a stink out of the tank, actually the biofilm will actually take care of it. And this is true of just for irrigation or for tanks that you're using for even to filter for potable quality. The biofilm's a good thing, so you don't need to scrub these tanks out with bleach every year. In fact, it would make it worse. It'll just make it more antiseptic, and you want that biofilm to form and to be your friend. Okay, so we have water in the tank, and then the overflow. The overflow has to be matched the size of the inlet. So even if you end up having 2 3-inch inlets from different parts of the roof, you need 2 3-inch outlets. Normally, you'll have 1 3-inch inlet, goes to the rain head, diverted to the tank, 3-inch, and then you need a 3-inch overflow, 3-inch diameter that is. And instead of just thinking of this as a place for it to overflow, think of it as an opportunity to, because you have gravity in your favor now, because the overflow is near the top of the tank, to take it to a landscape basin and let that water pour out so that you can actually support another plant. Because every tank overflows. You could even, in some cases, depending on the situation, you could end up watering 3 or 4 trees just with the overflow. Yeah. Somewhere. There it is. Any questions? I know there must be. Yeah,
So, Barnabas, let's say your house has like 8 downspouts.
yep,
I mean, you wouldn't want to necessarily put in 8 tanks.
no,
So how do you deal with routing the 8 downspouts to like a manageable number for
good
tanks?
question. I'll give you a second.
Okay.
That's sort of secret. Take this file over here. That one, MR. Let's do it and load it onto when this thing pops up. There it is. That's all I can do. This is my mom. Okay, back to your question. One other, don't let me forget your question, and I'll get back to this. So one of the other very important things about putting a rainwater system together of any size is to keep the daylight out. Just keep, especially direct sunlight. I like to say keep all daylight out. Because once you get direct sunlight in that tank, and you have a tiny bit of nutrient load, you'll start to grow algae, and the whole thing will turn into a science experiment that you don't want. It's very important to keep the sunlight out. Now, some tanks appear to be translucent. They will allow some light in, but as long as it's not full spectrum, it tends to keep the algae at bay. So most above ground green poly tanks filter out the red light, so algae doesn't grow. No, well, most tanks are UV resistant, but any of the light spectrum, trying to keep direct sunlight is the worst. So a little bit of indirect light seems to be okay. So all these, even these joints, these should be as opaque. These pipe inlets and penetrations should be as opaque as possible. So if you're using a very thin wall PVC plastic, paint it. Prime it and paint it because light will come through the plumbing into the tank. So, anyway, the other thing about tank installation, especially large tanks, is to embed them 8 to 12 inches in the ground. And all you need is a nice flat, compacted pad. Most of our soils are fine. Even on a clay soil that doesn't get a lot of moisture, you should be just fine. Two reasons to do this. One is to keep it anchored, keep the wind and keep it from moving around. And the other reason is you get to frost-proof your connections underground. So there's a little bulkhead, which is a gasketed tank penetration. These come in very different sizes. Most of them are 2-inch outlet at the bottom of the tank. This is for an overflow. But that's the bulkhead, and then you can connect up your plumbing here. Let's say it's just a gravity system, and say, well, how do I get the water out of the bottom of the tank? That bottom 12 inches. Well, take the 1-inch line a few feet away, you put it in an irrigation box, put a ball valve on there, and then a hose bib with a lid, so that I can and take that slightly downhill from it, or wherever is the best direction to put it, so that you have a really nice tank connection for a hose or to connect up to your irrigation system. Yes?
Did you connect both the water you save and city water to the same box? So that when you have water, you're using the tank, or when you don't have water.
You want the legal way to do it or the illegal way?
Let's try both.
Yes. How do I connect up, have a switch over from city water to rainwater in a box that either connects up to an irrigation system or to a hose, some way to extract the water from the tank? If you're connecting from city water, you pick up that water, that city water supply, on the landscape side of an RPZ, which is a standard backflow preventer. If you pick it up on the street side of the RPZ, it's illegal. So every landscape system legally is supposed to have an RPZ. a backflow preventer, which prevents city water from getting spoiled from an irrigation system. And it never happens, but or double check valve is another term used. So you have the city water coming in. You need the RPZ. It's a spring-loaded backflow preventer, and then this is the street supply, and this is the domestic connection. So you connect up it on the domestic side of the RPZ, and then you're fine. There's a number of ways. I sort of forgot your question, but there's a number of ways to fill up. You can actually put a yay. You can put a valve. You can put a. You can either bring this up with to a certain amount. Always keep 1,000 gallons of city water in the tank if you've used all the rainwater. You can do it with a float valve. You can do it with a fancy with a switch, that has a indicator inside the tank that will open and close a valve that allows city water to come in or not. Or there's a three-way valve, which is available where you can put city water into it, rainwater into it, and then it switches back and forth. And so that means you're not filling the tank, only rainwater in here. So it gets a little technical at that point. If anybody wants to do a really fully integrated system, that's the way to do it. I'll still go through this, but I'm actually getting to the nitty-gritty right now, so which is just fine. Yes, you had a question.
I'm noticing on here, connect city water to maintain certain levels, it gets too low, so is that required under the tank?
No, it's not.
Add some water to fill it up to a certain level?
It's not required. It's very optional. The lowest tech way to do this, is to put your hose in the top and fill it up to whatever you want, and consider that your irrigation budget of water. When it comes to pressurizing a system for an irrigation system, you can do booster pumps, but I don't like those. I like submersibles because they don't freeze, and you can't hear them. And then you put the connections out to the bottom of the tank. It's totally freeze-proof. You use a flexible 1-inch spa hose to connect from your submersible that goes out, pressurizes your irrigation. There's numerous pumps that are automatic, more or less automatic. Wire comes out the top, plug it into the house, and this is probably, in my opinion, best practice, is using submersible pumps to pressurize irrigation systems. Anybody want me to talk more about pumps?
Question on expenses, what's a rig like that bottom line?
Oh, this? The whole system? Okay. Yes, how much is a basic system like this? I put in a few years ago, I put in a 3,000-gallon tank with an automatic submersible pump connected to their irrigation system, and diverting half the house roof through a 3-inch pipe to the tank for $4,500. And that, of course, depends on a lot of things, but that gives you a ballpark. And that's a pretty big, decent system. You know, with all done in best practice. There's always shortcuts if you need to, but I've made all the mistakes, so you're getting the benefit from all the mistakes I've made. I was going to answer the gentleman's question about how do you deal with 8 different downspouts on a roof, especially like a hip roof with a very complicated roof plans. It comes down to the gutter and the location of the downspouts. So I guess I can do so I guess the short answer is finding the right tank site is important. So from a proximity to where that water is going to be used. So let's say you have a fairly complicated, well, not too complicated, but a roof plan like this. So this is let's say it's something like this. I'll make this a hip roof because a lot of people have hip roofs. but this one's a gable on the back. The rule of thumb is, if you want to locate a tank where you have access to as much roof surface as possible. And then the next thing to think about is, what's my proximity to where am I going to use the water? If I put a tank here and all my water is going to be used up here, it's going to be maybe a little complicated. But the gable end of a standard pitch gable roof is usually the best place to locate a tank, because I can access this gutter and this gutter to a tank site. If that's more water than I need, and my garden is up here, I will just settle for this surface and this surface, and maybe that front one. So I can divert the water from this surface, at least that zone, to a tank site, and this entire half to a tank site. So you can move downspouts. You can get a gutter company involved, and they have all the right equipment to do it. But I have people move downspouts all the time to more beneficial locations. The nice thing about hip roof plans is that usually the gutter is dead level all the way around, because the drip edge is actually exactly the same all the way around the house. So it's great that it's dead level, because then you can put a downspout anywhere. You don't have to worry about somebody to a gutter guy that's pitched it. Sometimes the pitching is pitching the wrong way, so you have to repitch it if that's the case. If he happened to pitch it this way to a downspout, and I really want it up here, you're going to have to reset that gutter. So that happens sometimes. Am I answering your question?
Yes.
You also want to make sure you don't capture the whole thing if you don't need to. So back to the supply and demand piece, right? So only capture what you need, and as you can see, at a 2,000 square foot house, we capture 13,000 gallons annually. Some of you just let it go. It's okay. I know as painful as it might be.
Sell it to
That's why I believe in starting with small gallons. I think bigger systems are obviously you get a little bit more more impact on the environmental conditions, but start small and experiment with it and add 100-gallon tanks and upgrade as you want to. Yes?
We have flat roof house with scuppers.
Okay. So,
Question?
thanks, Chris. How about a flat roof house with scuppers? It's actually the same principle applies. So let's say if I get the same, these are parapets now. And I have a scupper here, a scupper here, scupper here, and scupper here. So, and flat roofs aren't really flat. They're just very low pitched. And I've got a scupper here or here. So you can see I have basically the same zone. This side's flowing that way, and this side's flowing this way. So if it's a canale coming out, you may have to cut the canale off and put a scupper box into a downspout, and then lead it over into the tank, back to here. So what that looks like, you have a parapet, the roof comes through, and you have a box. Most houses with parapets and flat roofs usually have a scupper box and a 3 or 4 inch pipe flange on the bottom, and then you just take the downspout out and connect up to there into your tank. Does that make sense?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes. No. Yeah.
Yes. Fred and I, Fred's sitting over here, wave your hand, Fred. Fred and I went around town and looked at basic barrels to see what the ordinary mortal does. They don't do $4,500 systems of drinking water. Like Fred bought several 50-gallon barrels for his garden and some shrubs and hooked them up and so on. I mean, $4,500 is intimidating, it seems to me, to a lot of folks who just want to have a barrel, will collect water and water shrubs or a small barrel. So when you said you can use the smaller stuff and add them as you use, I just want to make it clear that when we went out and investigated the barrels, they run from $36.95 a Cal Ranch, you have to do your own drilling, $100 for a 55-gallon barrel with a diverter. I mean, there are ranges here. Some people do buy very large systems, but ordinary mortals, and if I was doing it, I'd probably buy a 50-gallon barrel and hook it up and water a tree and start from there. Just wanted to say that, and we've heard a lot from people like Home Depot and others that costs are intimidating to some folks, and so please keep in mind that the range is $36.95 to this, to this, to this, until you finally get to what an architect would do.
So, one of the simplest systems, and actually the first system that I put in for myself was a 100-gallon tank. I just intercepted the downspout, rerouted it into the top of the tank with a hose bib on it. And I put that one up on blocks or up on a high point in the landscape, put a hose bib on it. And in fact, I still use this in my garden because this, I have two of these on one side right inside my vegetable garden, a 20 by 30 foot vegetable garden. Actually, a few hundred gallons is enough storage and capture. And I do it with gravity on a hose bib in the summertime. And I let the water fill and drain in the wintertime because it's on a sunny side of the house. By the way, tanks won't freeze solid and burst. I've never had that happen, especially the bigger tanks. The smaller tanks, because I kept it on the sunny side of the house, I never had any trouble with it. And when you are putting a brass hose bib in the tank, no matter what size, a small tank, get the stubbiest one possible, the shortest brass hose bib, and they won't burst in the wintertime. If you get one that has a long stem, these will often break. So no, this the 4500 was one thing, but you can do it yourselfer can do this. But just go back just a second. The original principles, which is put some kind of collar on here to keep the direct sun out. So many tanks, I'll go back and see people just have a hole this big in the tank, and the pipe coming in is that big, and the sunlight is just pouring in there, and all kinds of critters can get in there too, and rot and die and plug up the system. And you really need to keep the critters out and the sunlight out. These tanks, made a tank that small, you can probably skip the overflow device if you want to. Just let it gush out the top. That's the lowest tech way to do it. Yes? Oh, sorry. Just a second.
I have a question about the tank itself. Is there some sort of standard for thickness of the tank? Because you see these Rubbermaid crack barrel things, that are like 50 gallons, 55 gallons. Did you use one of those instead of
Sure.
a very zero made
Yeah. No, you can use anything. There's
are the walls too thin? Or?
no, well, I mean, the beauty of a cylinder is that it's inherently very strong. So that the outward force is equal on all sides of the cylinder. So cylindrical shape is important for that reason. I don't like to use the clear or white plastic boxes in a cage that are used for, I don't know what they're normally used for, but you should make sure it's food grade. I'd like to steer away from something that's been used for chemicals or that will outgas or will contaminate the water. And most polypropylene, polyethylene tanks are food grade, which is it's important for the long term.
I noticed that the walls of the top of whatever it's made of is a little thin.
Well, if it holds water, it holds water, right?
Okay.
Yeah, as long as it's not.
They're a lot cheaper.
Just like I said, though, just keep the critters out and keep the sunlight out. Yes?
If you wanted to put a tank, smaller one, on the deck, how much worry is weight of the water?
Well, I think probably a couple hundred gallons. Yes, what about putting a rain tank on top of a deck? How heavy? It depends on the situation, but if you were if it was located over a column of the deck, you could probably go to quite a few hundred gallons and be fine. The 100-gallon tanks, I think would be totally fine. A couple hundred gallons, probably maximum, just on a general span. It's like, you'll see somebody puts a hot tub on their deck, they'll usually reinforce underneath that hot tub. Because those are usually about 500 gallons of water, and that adds up. But yeah, I would just look at the situation. You don't want to do yes, sir.
Have you had experience with, let's say, homeowner associations? I guess they can't by law restrict you from putting solar panels on your roof. But I don't know if a similar law exists to protect you from being able to put in rainwater barrels. Do you have experience where, yes, HOAs can limit your ability to put in a water catchment?
Yeah, okay. The question was, do HOAs restrict the rainwater tanks? And certain HOAs do restrict or make it difficult. Or, and so you have a couple of options with that. One is, and I've gone to HOA meetings and trying to explain to them the benefits of rainwater harvesting to help a customer out. They just don't even think about the big picture. All they care about is, as an HOA board member, what do I think it looks like, and what do I think my neighbors think it looks like? It's all about what it looks like. It has nothing to do with practicality or that this is a sustainable technology or anything like that. So if we can get them out of the what does it look like, and so if you can't, a couple of options. One is go underground, which is more expensive, put up a fence, or literally build a shed around the whole thing. So so a shed is okay, but a tank is not. Oh, you can also camouflage them too. I've put wire mesh around it, planted vines, put wire mesh around them, and actually fill it with rocks and put a rustic roof on it. You can do some really cool things. It's more work. But yeah, no, it's short-sighted stuff. I'm not a big HOA fan, but there's ways around it.
I had the question about doing them, several small ones in series on an elevation.
Okay.
What are the physics that I need to be concerned with?
Yep. So the request was multiple tanks like linked together, daisy chained up, where you cannot make them level to each other. So like on a slope. The best situation is to make them level to each other.
Not easy.
Because then,
Given my
and you
space.
see in that situation, let's say they're above ground, I'm not going to get fancy here. You've got a series of,
I've got like
you
3.
brought the first one and you say, this is so awesome, I want to do more.
Right.
And I've got the space for it. In fact, I'm going to just keep going until I can't go anymore. So the best way to do this is to link them at the bottom with a 3/4 or 1 inch line. Ideally, you get that underground so it doesn't freeze, so you don't have maintenance issues. And then you also should have an overflow. Because and that is if you only have one pipe filling this one up, these others have to keep up. You need this overflow so that once this fills up, the 1 inch line doesn't move that much water. So during a storm event, you want this 2 or 3 inch overflow filling up daisy chain.
Okay.
You don't have to worry about this freezing so much, but you do have to worry about the one on the bottom freezing in the wintertime if you haven't drained the system. Now, what she's talking about is if you have these tanks like this. So the only option you really have, if you do not want to connect them at the bottom, obviously it'll drain them out. So the overflow goes into the next one, and this one overflows into the next one. And the way you extract the water, you're going to have to extract it out of each one because they're going to be isolated from each other, unfortunately. So you'd have to put a hose bib in each one of these and use them up as you go. So the overflow into the next one down, overflow into the next one down is probably really the only way you can do that. Does that make sense?
Pretty much. I mean, I don't have that severe of a slope. It's just, where I know I can't get them easily. But the big thing is trying to find these coupling parts that are usable, and it seems like, the standard
You can get,
Home
okay, this is
Depot
a
places
huge one.
don't. And I don't even know what to call them.
This is a bulkhead. You can get this in 1 inch or 3/4 inch, and they're only a few dollars each.
Okay.
This
Okay.
3-inch one's actually about 200.
Where do you get them?
You can get these at Loomis Tank Center, or you can also get them, you might be able to get them at Pro Water, and even the hardware store might have very small ones. All you need is really 1/2 inch, 3/4, or 1-inch bulkheads between each of these. Here, when you're connecting up here. And they are a few dollars each. The smaller ones are really affordable. These ones get really expensive for bigger systems. More technical questions? Yes?
How long can you hold water before it boils?
Well, I've had water spoil, but because I had a bunch of elm gunk in there, and then the bacteria took over, anaerobic, got all stinky. But then I cleaned it out, I fixed the situation, let it fill up again. And you can leave it indefinitely. If you can keep the sunlight out and keep the critters out and keep insects out, very important too, making sure mosquitoes don't breed in there. You can store it indefinitely using best practice. If it's an open top thing, it's just going to get disgusting. And is that the difference there? Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Considering a gravity flow outlet would be the best situation because you're not dealing with pumps.
Right.
The advantage would be to have the highest tank you could possibly get as opposed to the widest tank.
Not necessarily. The repeating question is because if you're extracting the water from the tank just with gravity through a hose bib on the bottom of the tank, are you better to go vertical? Well, most tanks actually are not made in a vertical proportional dimension because they're tippy and they're more dangerous. So you'd be better off if you have the space to keep a lower profile tank in series is safer. And and you're not going to get the difference between, if water, 1 foot of water is 0.4 psi. So to get enough, get up to household pressure, 60 psi or even 30, you'd need a vertical column, 50 feet high. So it's not worth worrying about that. They're also really cool, if you need more volume out of these, that you can find these at Home Depot, sometimes a hardware store, these little plug-in, these hose pumps. Anybody ever used one of these? It's a little box.
Fish tank is the same basic. I have 2 fish tanks at different levels, and the water circulates with the hose pump you're talking about.
Yeah, these are really cool. You have an outlet on the outside of the house, and here's the hose bib. You put the hose to it from the tank. A lot of times you need some power. It's about $100. It's this little plug-in thing. You put a hose in and a hose out, and it bumps it. If it's just for hand watering, there's some really simple pumps out there for that kind of thing.
60 pounds, right?
60?
Yeah, on most of them, yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's what I used to use to drain washing machines with when I was
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
And 60 pounds.
Just a little pump like that, right?
Yeah, I could water the whole yard with it.
Yeah, they're awesome.
It's like I'm on the house.
Yeah. The low tech is better sometimes.
Yeah. Has someone written perhaps yourself, a workbook to?
Yep. This is a good place to start, this book. They're available right here. There's also, the projector's being held today. Brad Lancaster, Rainwater, the Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands book. Brad's out of Tucson. That's a good book. And, hey, how's my time?
We quit at precisely noon, so you have 35 minutes.
Okay, so if there's any more technical questions, then otherwise I'm going to start going through the slides, because you might find something interesting here. Some of it might be review, since we started like this, but some of it might not. Do it? Okay, yes.
Links to these references on your website?
No.
No.
Okay. All right. Okay, so anyway, we already talked about anything interest here. No, keep going. Okay, so this is this slide shows about the argument for rainwater harvesting, so I just have a couple of things to show why it's important. One is, this is the USDA hardiness map. Then this is a few years old, but it shows the difference between 1990 and 2006, how much warmer these areas are. This, the area in pink, area in yellow is no change in minimum wintertime temperatures. The areas in pink is 1 degree of minimum change. So that's over a period of 16 years. So the climate is getting warmer. This is just USDA that has taken data from every weather station in the country, crunched the numbers. So it's getting warmer, which means that you're going to need more irrigation to get the same productivity out of a plant. That make sense? And the red areas, like in the mountainous areas, have actually changed, have gotten warmer faster. You can also see them, there's another, they're showing it in a different way here. 1990, 2006, 2012. And you can see the colder area as well anyway. I can keep going, let's go. This is a water sustainability index map. Obviously you can see where the water stresses are, mostly out west, including Arizona. Red, this dark being the most, this purple being the most extreme, red also being high, moderate to low. So it's pretty obvious, everybody kind of knows this. Drought, water levels in reservoirs, not just Lake Mead, but most all of the reservoirs are down through drought. Productivity's down. And so I think the scariest part is that with current projections, and agriculture in Arizona uses 70% of the water supply. Agriculture does. And so what's going to happen is that, I think the scary part is that by 2030, there's a 40% gap. There's actually going to be not enough water to go around. So this is about current trends going on. This is not if we implemented rainwater harvesting, because that would make a huge difference. Let's keep going. So I don't anticipate road warrior, tanks of water being attacked. But anyway, so anyone knows you guys know the Chino story, Chino basin story probably better than I do, so I'm not going to spend any time on that.
Summary.
So here's another. So where is a lot of our water naturally is stored in alpine glaciers, and as we know, they're disappearing as well. And so what happens is that how are we going to make up the difference between this naturally stored moisture, and if it's not even available anymore in the river systems? What are we going to do? Well, this would be the first time people thought about this. In the Negev Desert in Israel and Jordan, the 6th century, they've been thinking about it. And all of their structures had cisterns in the basements. And they did too in Sri Lanka, sort of more of an island nation. And even TJ, Thomas Jefferson, had rainwater harvesting at Monticello. So system doesn't work anymore, but it's a little old at this point. Thomas Jefferson built it. Needs a little upgrade, but it's there. I've seen it. It's pretty cool. There's a quote here. We'll just skip it. I can't read it. Australia, this photo is taken in Australia. They probably lead the world and Germany in rainwater harvesting technology and widespread use. Difference in a place like Australia is they'll get 1/4 of an inch of rain every other day in certain times of the year. So they have a completely different calculation than we do. Since we get all our rain concentrated in monsoon and then in winter, if it's spread out over the year, your tanks don't need to be so big. And they have articulated this and passed code where everybody's washing machine is hooked up to this, and an outdoor shower. They won't use it for potable. They'll use municipal water for drinking and for washing dishes, but they'll use rainwater for almost everything else. This is in Hawaii, believe it or not, is as wet as Hawaii can be, certain parts of Hawaii. The groundwater situation is terrible. Basically, Hawaii is basically a fractured rock, and they can suck in seawater very quickly. So people live at that, and that's probably a 10,000 gallon tank. And most people on that part of the island, which is between Hilo and the volcano, are all, majority of them, of the rural folks are on rainwater harvesting as their sole water supply. Okay. Okay, I started on this a little bit. Reasons for residential. Environmental ethics, just because we think it's cool. Self-sufficiency, we don't need help from anybody. Better water quality, this is true, it's the best irrigation water there is. It's cheaper than drilling well in some cases. Prefer irrigation gardening, no other water available. Return on property investment, still yet to be seen. It depends, it's very similar to solar. Depends on the eye of the evaluator. Some people think solar will increase the property value. I think that's showing to be. Any realtors in the room that can help with this? I'm just curious because I'm always like checking in. Only a certain crowd, only a certain crowd will actually see the value of the system. I don't think it's that broad yet. Reduction of demand on municipal supply and security, and increased resiliency so that you're not stuck out in if the infrastructure fails or something goes wrong. Okay, now commercial reasons. That was residential. This is a system put together at Preston College. This is just for gardening. And so here's their reasoning is a little bit different. And most commercial folks they think of it as an investment, lower operating cost, good for marketing, showing how green we are, public relations. Did you lean on it? Okay, good. Yeah, some of these are green buildings and they get rated. It also improves stormwater requirements in cities that actually have stormwater requirements. It's educational and public awareness. Okay. Okay, highest uses for rainwater. This is a good one because I think the number one without any special conditions, I think that using rainwater to grow food, after potability, meaning that you need water to drink, that growing food would be number 2, and then bathing would be the next use, washing machine, landscape irrigation is kind of down low. This is high quality water, extremely high quality water. That's why I rank this the way I do. Fire suppression, excellent for evap coolers. Your filters will last forever on rainwater. Anything else you can think of? Toilets being the absolute bottom. Even though some commercial projects that are going for LEED or going very green will the first thing they'll use rainwater for is to offset their toilet flushing, because then they don't have to filter it to such high quality. And I understand that. I just think it's a terrible thing to waste. Toilets do amount to about 30% of a domestic water budget, though. So, that is if you're not willing to let it mellow. Okay, next one. Okay, where have you seen these landscapes? Yeah, look at all the lawn, look at the grass, keep going. They're on the hottest, driest cities in the country. I don't know, so keep going. So we've brought a landscape ethic with us from other parts of the country, whether it's from the east, or people insist on walking on grass. And that the only definition of a landscape is turf. And so landscape on life support. So if you're building mounds and you're putting exotic plants on top of those mounds, and then you're shedding all the stormwater off, and then you're bringing city water in, it's like putting them on an IV. So, and also it makes for that kind of intensive irrigation makes for weak plants. They also tend to get over fertilized as well, and they just add water solution. So anyway, we're cutting all that out. Keep going. And so this is the landscape. The landscape industry mentality. Even though I'm part of the landscape industry, The maintenance part of the landscape industry is, I find, quite frustrating. It's really more about, this is out of their trade magazine, fertilize, annihilate, fertilize, annihilate, fertilize, annihilate, and water and annihilate. Water intensive, they're creating maintenance by over-irrigating. At least 50% of all landscapes I've ever seen are over-irrigated. So, wasteful, costly. That's an understatement right there. Okay. So, using nature as a model, you can see what's growing there. You can, just through observation, through, and what you can understand the moisture regime is based on the plants that are growing there. So, things to consider when thinking of not just thinking of rainwater harvesting, but think of the overall site and think of and where water is available. So you can do passive rainwater harvesting just by sculpting the soil and your finished grading properly to slow it down, soak it in. More on that. Hot sides, windy sides require more irrigation. Rain catchment, of course, we've been talking a lot about that. Soil building can double the amount of moisture delivered to plants with good, healthy soils. And obviously, plant considerations. There's a lot of talk about that. Of course, this makes a huge difference. This is where plant understanding comes in. And like you said, there's an HOA. Or do they even allow it? And are there restrictions? Or incentives? And the incentives are gone, aren't they? We don't have tank incentives anymore in Prescott, do we?
Yes, there's still incentives.
Okay.
On the city water conservation website.
Okay. Yes.
In Yavapai County and its municipalities, are there any regulations against potable use of harvested rainwater?
Not on a single family home property. We tried to do it. We almost became this close to doing it at the Southwest Wine Center on the Bird Valley campus, but they would require monthly testing, and they didn't want to incur the expense for the health department. But we almost did it. We almost made that a net zero water building. And very close. That's a project that you should take. Anyone been over there? What do you think of that tank system out there?
I think it's magnificent. Yeah.
Pretty good one. Okay. Thanks. Water terms. You guys are well versed in water. I don't need to. I already talked about rainwater as a alternative water supply, and I think that's fine. And we'll just move on. Now, gray water integration, though. Does anyone do gray water here? I mean, that's willing to say they do inside the city limits?
I confess.
Okay, good. Yeah, my house is in the county as well, and I gray water all over the place. But you need to link a rainwater overflow, a flush. You can't just use gray water. You need it a few times a year for the rainwater to flush those things out, to flush the salts out and the concentration of any pathogens. Having some rainwater flush your gray water parts out is a really good idea. Oh, that was wow. Okay, passive catchment is actually the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, with a pick and a shovel, you can have more impact. You can collect more rainwater for the amount of time and energy investment than you can with active. Active being capturing in a tank for reuse later. So passive, you can direct runnels and scuppers into planted areas like this, or parking lots we've designed where in between each car we have a swale that captures the water and self-irrigates the landscape. The ARD building at NAU campus. All these trees are irrigated just from a roof drain that trickles through here and waters all of those. And there's lots of passive. You see, it also is excellent for reducing runoff, especially on commercial projects where stormwater can be a real issue in design phase. Reduce rainwater or his gray infrastructure, meaning gray infrastructure is the opposite of green infrastructure, meaning that you'll actually save on civil engineering. You won't have to do as much because you're using landscape and natural methods for soaking that water in. It's great for habitat. Self-irrigating landscape, what could be better? Because drip systems break down anyway. So the mantra is slow it, spread it, and sink it into the soil to where it's available to the plants. Yeah, so cheapest way to get water back into the landscape. But there's a limited time latitude, so you're only going to get water when it rains, and then it soaks into the soil. So improving that soil is important in areas where you're capturing it passively. So let's go to the next slide. And active catchment is what we've been talking about all day, is that. The biggest advantage with active catchment is it maximizes your latitude, your time latitude. So you don't have to be as intensively planning where that moisture is going to go. You can store it and then use it either through a hose or irrigation system later when required. So this active system gives you, think of it as a big time latitude. So that's its major advantage. Otherwise, if that's not important, if it's a native landscape, you should be predominantly passive. Because it's self-irrigating, and our native plants are adapted to our water regime, so moisture regime and climate patterns. So I don't know if there's anybody here from SRP, but this was the system they really made a point of showing me. Is, hey, have you seen our rainwater harvesting system? We're quite proud of it. I'm like, really? I was looking around, expecting 10,000 gallons of tanks. And there was a whiskey barrel with a hose bit. I was in shock. I didn't even know what to say. But like, good on ya. Okay. I'll go through this again as a quick review. I know I started off talking about the overall system, but and I'll do it really, really quickly. But roof, basic filtration on the gutter, rain head, first flush device with its dripper over to the plant, inlet, overflow, same size as the inlet, and submersible pump option or booster pump. In warmer climates like Phoenix and Tucson, booster pump is much more common, as it is in Australia, Mediterranean climate like that. Tanks vary. Let's go pump monitor. Yeah, okay. This is we kind of already did a budget with our 2,000 square foot, so I don't think we need to do that. I just wanted to show you, though, that you can strategize landscape, especially since most of the water you want to do is for irrigation of landscape. If you're starting from scratch or modifying, you can use the passive method to get water close to the house, where in a sense you can actually double the concentration of moisture that ground would normally get, because you're shedding this roof off into your landscape. So plants that require a lot more water, like productive fruit trees, you are much better off next to the house where you can manipulate that water through finished grading, swales, and basins. Yeah, 20,000 gallons of water, average small swimming pool. Let's keep going. You have all the water that we clean and articulate and deliver, because we only adjust about 1%. So all the expense that goes into making our municipal water all potable quality, we actually only adjust 1%. I don't know, I find that interesting. Okay, this is how you do a budget, an irrigation budget for landscape. This is just a sample. For 1 gallon plant, we use 1 gallon per acre emitter, 5 gallon plant, 2 1 gallon per hour emitters, 15 gallon plant or bag and burlap tree, 3 1 gallon per hour emitter. So take that, times the number of plants of that each container size, 51 gallons, 35 gallons. So this is kind of an average new landscape for a new house. This is not extravagant, but it's not minuscule either. So add this up. Every time I irrigate for an hour, it's 380 gallons. Let's go to the next. right? And then I figure a 2-year establishment period for new landscape, even natives. Not all natives, but majority of them. You need 2 years of drip irrigation before you can take them off. I consider summer, April through October, 1 time per week, or 2 hours, that's 760 gallons. Well, and then we either shut it down or use it as needed in the wintertime. And there's a 22,000 gallon budget for new landscape. That will go down. This is annual gallons. This will go down as the landscape is established. And if you do your passive rainwater harvesting properly and all your plants are in basins and collecting water, you should be able to reduce this to almost, except for very intense fruit growing or annual vegetable growing, you should be able to plan everything else out to be self-irrigated. Okay. A couple ways to do a budget. And it was probably easier to do it the way I already described, just to do it sort of on paper, but you can see, since everybody understands when it rains, this was a typical landscape that we're collecting water, January, February, March, because we're not irrigating. April, we start irrigating, and May and June being the heaviest month, you can see all the water that's used. And so I'm using this block as my design number, adding these up. So this would be how many gallons I would need to get through if I was to be completely net zero and just have rainwater for irrigating this particular landscape. I need to add these up and have a tank that size, approximately. Anyway, because it's not a perfect balance, but that's what you're shooting for. Okay. So before this landscape and naturally occurring and native landscapes, I mean, they're all in perfect sync with the climate already. Keep going. It's when we do this, it's when we disturb it, and then bring everything back in, keep going, and do this. This is when this is the trouble. Here's the secret weapon in this image, though. As nasty as this looks, this can capture so much water. Now look at these roofs, if properly stored and articulated. Look at all these roads, all this hardscape. You know, we could, and if properly distributed, these areas shouldn't be desert. These areas should be fruit orchards. There should be a food landscape here. There's so much water available because the lot coverage is like 70%. So think of it that way, because some of us live, in neighborhoods like this. I mean, I do, and they're intensely developed. And so there's, instead of undoing it, I'm glad to hear that sigh, though. That was good. So anyway, yeah. So keep going.
Are there net zero neighborhoods?
No. I'm making a case for it. It'd be nice if there was, though. But there's a case for it. Like I said, based on the premise of how much capture area we have. Of course, the roof areas being the highest quality, and the hardscape, the streets, not being lower quality because the streets and cars and hydrocarbons and whatnot. But those areas should be irrigating public landscape, not edible landscape, but habitat, etc. Anyway, and so let's see. Water supply source, offsite water from drainage, street, or adjacent property. Oh yeah, so I'm bringing this up because you need to look at the situation that you're on. You may have water. I've had many people complain that they have a neighbor is allowing some stormwater to gush through their property, and I'm like, great, because we can use it to our advantage. We can manipulate that as long as it's not a major storm flow that's going to take the house out. You can usually use it to your advantage. So look for offsite water. And think like a watershed. That's why I put that up there. Yeah. So look upstream. See where you can get more water. Precipitate that falls. Landscape. Okay. So count the number of inches that actually fall on your landscape in our 10 or 12 inch year. You can actually use that as part of the calculation. That water should not be escaping at all. It should be all soaked in. Precipitate that falls on hardscape diverted into landscape. Okay, so you've heard of porous pavement, and that's like a very green practice, and it is, but in certain parts of the world where it's very rainy, like in the Northwest, in Seattle and places, porous pavement was really brought to everybody's attention. It makes sense in a wet climate, so that because they have a water quality issue, they don't have a water quantity issue. They get plenty of rain, plenty of moisture, but because it's constantly washing off the streets and into the waterways, they actually have a bigger pollution issue than we do in their water quality. So that's where porous pavement comes in. I don't believe in it in an arid climate like us. I'd rather do a hardscape, shed that water off of a concrete driveway into adjacent planters where the trees can take advantage of it. The porous pavement is notoriously, it clogs up, there's maintenance issues, and it's expensive. Pavers are porous pavement, however. If you want to do paver driveway, that's totally fine, that works too. Roof captured, we already talked about that. And municipal well for backup. Or you can steal water from your neighbor. I'm joking. So I've done a little case study here to show sort of a typical lot with a roof. We have 2,500 square feet of roof area. And that's how much I did a calculation. I think I based on 13 inches of annual rainfall, I think. So I got that. That's for the whole site, mind you, right? 87,000 gallons?
I'm sorry, that's the whole site, not just the roof?
That's the whole site.
Okay.
So looking at everything, that's why I showed you that total hydrology slide. You take everything into consideration because, you know, if we're going to do things more passively, we don't want to overbuild. We don't want to do expensive tanks if we don't need them. We only want to do the tanks where that meet our budget. And so we already know we get 12 or 13 inches of moisture on the landscape as it is, just from rainfall and snow. And so let's look at, so that's why I did this. So the little garden patch will require more moisture. Now that's supply side, demand side. Anyway, this might get confusing because it takes a while to explain all these numbers, but instead of doing that, I want you to look at a couple of different numbers. So here's our focus on the demand for a second here. So the household landscapes have a total 105 gallons per day, and that's an annual number. So you can, if you add everything up. So let's go to the next slide. That's no behavior change, by the way. That's just like status quo. So then if we change our efficiency to low flow, normal toilets, front toilet, all the efficiency inside, we can get that down approximately 59 gallons a day for this household. So we'll do that, go down again. Low flow, composting toilet. I'm not saying you want to do this. Some of these behavior changes might be too much for you. And get this down as low. We can get to 46 gallons per day, and there's our. So we can see this number is less than the overall water that falls on the site. So you can see, you can start to, paint a picture of how that might work. And the way to make that work is by getting rid of the toilets. I've tried. I've crunched enough numbers, and flush toilets it's something that we're not willing to get rid of. So that's why you might need to flush. I think toilets, next slide, please. Toilets should be flushed with city water because its quality is so low. So I'd hate to see rainwater flush those toilets. But anyway, it's a big water budget killer. So if you want to put an extra tank in to be able to flush toilets, that's fine. Okay. Plant considerations. Yeah, so I have a couple of approaches that every landscape should be at least 50% native plants minimum, just so that we're not being ridiculous with and the plants are already adapted and naturalized to the conditions. And the question of turf. And so there's Does anybody, I'm not necessarily anti-turf, but I'm anti a lot of turf. It's also really hard to, it's hard to maintain, it's expensive, and of course it's a water hog. A small thing, synthetic turf, I'm becoming a little warmed up to it if you have to have turf. There's also another drill alternative, which is native using native grama grass, which is will rely completely on. My lawn is just grama grass. I don't water it at all. If it's still dormant, 1st of May, and I want it to green up, I will put some rainwater on it with a hose, and it'll immediately start to sprout. So there are what's called summer green lawn. Somebody sells it, the seed mix as a summer green lawn mix. So, and they're native grass plants that make a fairly decent lawn. Not nearly as nice and smooth as Kentucky bluegrass, but hey, it's okay. So the other thing is to do landscape in districts, in hydro zones, so that you keep the most wettest required plants clustered together, so they're easier to maintain. So when there's a little bit of everything all through it, it's much harder to manage. So to concentrate whether you're going to need lots of water in flower gardens or in active vegetable gardens is where you should be using most of the water in landscape. Okay. So what is the budget, right? If you have a 5,000 square foot house, think how much more water you can capture. Think how much more lush your landscape can be. So and I just designed a tiny house for somebody here in Prescott. It's 320 square feet. So his water budget's quite small, his supply side. So luckily he doesn't want to do any gardening because he's actually because he needs to drink it. It's a potable, just wrap it up. Awesome. Next. Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. So obviously once established, no irrigation required. Keep going here. Yeah, I can end with these additional considerations. Well, I'll just leave them on the board for you to read. But design from pattern to detail, so meaning understand where we live and your exact situation and what you're trying to do. But feel free to look at those. Any questions? Yes.
We're gonna officially end this because it's noon and that's when people need to go. You can hang around and talk to Barnes. He'll be here. Any of you want to come up and talk to him, I assume you'll be here for a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much. Give them a round of applause.